Senator Sobers, you have 15 more minutes.
Mr. Vice President, I won't take up the full time. But to touch on Clause 7 in particular, so Clause 7 is the particular part of the bill that deals with the customs increase from $3,000 to $5,000. Now, in principle, my position is that I don't really and truly have a difficulty with the increase itself. But when I considered in terms of the feeling, the environment persons are in when they are coming back to Trinidad, some persons when they take a trip, I could recall the first time that I took a trip to the States, it's a feeling of euphoria to leave our shores to go somewhere else. And I mean, sometimes when you, as a family, in my situation, there were 6 of us, we had to save a considerable amount of time before we were actually able to make that trip. And having saved and gone away and procured items in the US and in foreign jurisdictions, to come back home sometimes thinking then that you're going to be subjected to members of the customs division going through your personal effects to determine whether or not items procured away would have been for personal use. And I mean, the spirit of this particular section is set up to ensure then that there are those who are commercial or retail sellers who would go away and purchase a lot of items that they intend to resell here in Trinidad. And in an effort to escape paying proper duties that they should pay on these items because they intend to resell them, they would go away and fill their suitcases and come back. And those are the persons that I think the Act is really trying to capture. But for the families, the individuals who would have saved and would have gone away and would have purchased some goods, when they return, in terms of how the procedure is at the airport, it really begs the question as to whether or not maybe some thought should have gone into, at the appropriate stage, to treat with the Customs Act with respect to that particular section. Because persons are really and truly subjected to customs officers in some instances, not all, very few, I might say, who would simply give arbitrary prices to items or make arbitrary decisions on the floor to indicate that that is a brand new item, or why you have 2 or 3 of that, you intend to sell it, and all sorts of foolishness that would allow them now to say, well, listen, you've exceeded your personal allowance, and you have to pay on this, and you have to pay on that. And there's no real way even in terms of the appeal process at the airport or ports of entry with respect to this particular situation, it is also not done in a proper manner set out to really allow for persons who may be aggrieved by the situation to procure a feeling of justice prevailing in their particular case. And even around this Christmas season, when many persons may go away to purchase things for their own personal use, I know of situations that I have been in, because we would have been called as lawyers sometimes to attend proceedings at the airport itself, where persons would purchase things personally, and then in terms of being subjected to search, you know, some officials, very few as I said before, not all, very, very few, would be literally sitting down behind the desk after opening up your suitcase and telling them, well, listen, you see that had to stay, or you had to pay X, Y, and Z amount of money. And you have a lot of persons who are ignorant of the law and would just give up these items. So there's a level of corrupt practices that prevail within these situations that I think, apart from just looking at raising the personal allowance that one would get in terms of exemption, which I said before is a welcomed approach, holistically in terms of the practice at the airport itself and other ports of entry with respect to the manner in which officers would arbitrate over what could be considered to be personal effects, there should be a proper procedure and practice in place, and it should not just be left whimsically to any particular customs officer and how they feel or how they wake up on that side of the bed in that particular morning or whatever the case is. And apart from that, Mr. Vice President, I must say the measures within this particular bill, I mean, some of them may in fact be welcomed, others we would have our reservations about. I think in terms of effective approach and in terms of properly ensuring that members of the public don't only just hear about these measures, they actually feel these measures and they are educated as to the efficacy of these measures and how it would better individuals' daily activities and their daily lives. I think the government really did not do as much as they should have. More education, more marketing of the measures, a better implementation would have gone a much greater and longer way to ensure that people really appreciate what could in fact be procured from these measures within this particular bill. I hope in terms of the wrap-up that we get some of that information, if it is that activities of that nature have in fact been executed by this administration, we get some of that information from the wrap-up or from other speakers. And we hope that in future a better approach would be done with respect to finance legislation. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Senator Diana.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to contribute to the debate today. Upon looking at this piece of legislation, it is clear that the government understands the dampened economic environment in which we are operating in. After cutting expenditure and having to resort to increasing taxes in various forms over the past couple of years, they have recognized that there has been a slide in the economy, and as a result is attempting to implement some sort of incentives not only in the energy sector but also in the non-energy sector. But at the same time, there's still a fiscal deficit that we are operating, a deficit that stands at 3.1% of GDP. And as a result, I see a consequential amendment in Clause 2 of the bill here today to amend the Treasury Bills Act. Now today, Mr. Vice President, I will be brief. I would like to touch on, firstly, Clause 3 and Clause 9, which looks at the energy loss relief and the capital allowance to the energy companies. Now, with respect to this revenue-raising measure in the energy sector, it is a measure that is much needed, but these measures are just a start to the reform of the revenue collection in the energy sector. A lot of focus needs to be placed on increasing revenues in the energy sector by tightening up the loose ends. I'm sure the Honorable Minister of Finance is working assiduously in improving inefficiencies to stop revenue leakages in the energy sector. We have been hearing time and time again that the selling price reported to the Trinidad and Tobago government on which energy companies are taxed appears to be lower than the price at which it was actually sold. The Gas Master report completed by Putin and Partners in September 2015 have indicated that Trinidad and Tobago continues to lose up to US $1.5 billion annually in revenue. That is from the energy sector. Putin and Partners have also determined that transfer pricing is the main cause for underreporting of revenue by energy companies in Trinidad and Tobago. We need to tackle this problem and introduce legislation to deal with it. Based on my research, the last time I saw mention was made of it in this Honorable House would have been during the 2017-2018 budget presentation, when the Honorable Minister indicated that groundwork was being laid to lay this legislation. So I humbly ask on the status of this preparatory work. The longer we take, the more revenues are eroded away. And of course, when prices fall together with a decline in production, we are faced with a double whammy on the Treasury. Mr. Vice President, I would like to touch on the clause which addresses first-time exports to CARICOM. Now, intra-regional exports in the CARICOM, within CARICOM, accounts for around 14% of our total exports. That is based on 2017 World Integrated Trade Systems data. So it makes sense to give these producers and manufacturers that incentive so that we reach out, so that they are allowed to reach out and promote themselves to the regional markets and facilitate market penetration. Businesses would be able to capture a lot of benefits, especially in Guyana, who is reported to experience significant growth in the next couple of years. It has the potential to also boost trade in services and boost local manufacturing. Because, Mr. Vice President, trade complementarity lies with the Caribbean, Latin America, and Central America. Now, when I say trade complementarity, what I mean is that the exports in Trinidad and Tobago is best matched with the imports of CARICOM, Latin America, and Central America. Now, this was reported in the international trade policy laid by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. On the other hand, I also understand the need to restrict the benefit to first-time exporters only. I don't think the CARICOM Treaty would allow for prolonged export subsidies for member countries. So some may say that, oh, why is it just first-time exporters we are allowing this benefit to? Why not extend it to exporters who export beyond the first time of entering a country? I believe the restrictions in the CARICOM Treaty has some sort of restriction in the level of subsidies that we can provide to exporters in the region. Clause 4 also, I think, makes some amendments to the corporation tax and corporation tax allowance to companies in the creative sector. And this includes companies that are in the business of producing audio, visual, video, fashion, and art for purposes of education, local entertainment, local culture. And they can now claim on expenditure for producing up to $6 million. Now, my comment on this is that this is increasing the export subsidy in the industry indefinitely. And while it can facilitate these firms establishing themselves globally, over time it can work against firms' productive efficiency and hence, as a result, have a negative impact on their competitiveness at a global level. As such, I would suggest implementing this for a defined period of time, maybe not exceeding 5 years. According to classical international trade theory, it purports that there are overall negative welfare effects from implementing protectionist policies such as export subsidies in a small, open economy. Over time, the cost to taxpayers becomes burdensome and there are deadweight losses on productive efficiency. Now, when I say deadweight losses, I refer to allocative inefficiencies. I refer to economic disadvantages. Now, I wanted to actually jump straight to clause 2 when I saw the bill. That was the first thing that jumped out to me, which interferes with the power of the minister to borrow under the Treasury Bills Act. Now, Mr. Vice President, upon my first time in this House and my first finance bill not too long after my appointment, I had buried myself in research in all these different legislation that looks at the debt threshold for various areas. And it seems to be a trend that each time right after an election, a government comes into this House laying legislation for debate to approvals for increase. And what I found was that in 2011, the Development Loans Act was amended from $20 billion to $30 billion. The Guarantee of Loans Act, that is the Companies Act, was amended to increase from $9 billion to $26 billion. Then, again, the Development Loans Act, External Loans Act, Guarantee of Loans Act in 2015, all experienced an increase. Not to forget the Government Savings Bond Act and the Central Bank Act, which recently received amendments too. And we are here today again asking this Honorable House to be okay with an increase in the Treasury Bills Act. Now, Mr. Vice President, the Monetary Policy Report from the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago recently released indicated that we are still operating in a subdued environment. And I pulled out some statistics from the Monetary Policy Report. So despite reporting a lower fiscal deficit for the last fiscal period, that is fiscal 2018-2019, it has been primarily because of the tax amnesty, which came in at around $2.4 billion. The Monetary Policy Report also indicated that the energy sector production is down. Natural gas production has averaged to 3.5 BSCF in the first 6 months of 2019. Crude oil production has declined by 12%. Drilling is on the decline, and refining, of course, has contracted by about 18% because of the closure of the Petroleum refinery. And we have also recorded a fiscal deficit in the non-energy sector averaging around $2 billion. Balance of payment deficit recently reported 6% of GDP. That is for Q2 of 2019. And interestingly, the labor force participation rate has been declined. Now, what this tells me, Mr. Vice President, is that the fiscal accounts of Trinidad and Tobago continues to be restrained. And I look at the debt servicing requirements, and I made this point during the budget debate that our debt service requirements have exceeded capital expenditure since 2016. Debt service today, well, based on the draft estimates of expenditure, is estimated at $8.6 billion. The net public sector debt, as of September 2019, is $103 billion, 63.3% of GDP, a mere 1.7% below the 65% threshold established by our Honorable Minister of Finance. Domestic debt between October 2018 and September 2019 was recorded at $7.7 billion, of which $1.4 billion were debt management bills. So what are these debt management bills? Now, these debt management bills are bills that are issued under the Treasury Bills Act, and of course, it's a type of Treasury bill. But let us not confuse debt management Treasury bills with open market operation Treasury bills. Open market operation Treasury bills is a monetary policy tool used by the central bank, and the monies derived from this tool is liquidity, or to remove liquidity in the system when too much is circulating and we have inflationary pressures being created. Debt management bills, on the other hand, debt management Treasury bills, on the other hand, the proceeds from selling these bills, now these bills are usually sold to the public, to the general public, public institutions, and other designated persons who may not be primary dealers. Open market operation Treasury bills are usually sold to commercial banks and primary dealers. So the proceeds from debt management bills goes into the consolidated fund and is used to finance government operations. Now, we must bear in mind these are short-term debt instruments that usually does not exceed more than 1 year. So as a result, I believe, and I think the Honorable Minister did indicate that this is to be used as a short-term debt management tool. So In March of 2019, the central bank auctioned these debt management bills at around $1.5 billion. According to data from the central bank database, as of June 2019, $2.7 billion was recorded as outstanding payments for debt management bills. Therefore, this means that we have around $2.3 billion remaining under the Act, because the Act currently exists at $5 billion. Is it that we intend to issue these T-bills that amounts to around $4.3 billion? The finances, what are the finances going to be used for? Is it as wages? Is it salaries? What type of short-term expenditure are we using these finances that we raise to finance? And I ask this because while it is indeed cheaper to borrow via issuing these debt instruments, I think the minister said it's around 2%. I think I looked for this year on central bank and it's around 1.08%, and which is significantly cheaper, right? But I am again concerned about the overdraft at the central bank. Is it that we now have to resort to this form of short-term financing because the limit on the overdraft is probably at its capacity? Because the last time I raised a question in this honorable house, I know the balance fluctuates. It was answered to me that it's currently at 87% its capacity. So just a question for clarification. And another point on clause 2, which deals with these T-bills, is with respect to its account to the debt to GDP ratio. T-bills, just like the overdraft facility, is not included in the debt to GDP ratio. So in my view, the debt to GDP ratio is not always an adequate reflection on how a true reflection on our debt, but international benchmarks resort to this indicator anyway. So, Mr. Vice President, as I wrap up, the issue on clause 2 tells me that we need to continue to exercise some sort of fiscal restraint. Although recognizing that we have to provide incentives for the country, we also need to create avenues for short-term improvements in revenue. With those few words, Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Minister of Public Utilities.
Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, the Honorable Minister of Finance would have presented the finance bill in the House of Representatives last week, Friday. This bill is now before us in the Senate, and I am indeed happy to stand in support of it. Mr. Vice President, it's not surprising to anyone, and I heard the independent senator speak about the positions of which this government had to take and to deal with this economy, having been given the dubious task of bringing this country from a state of financial disaster. I think we are all aware, and to some extent, I heard Senator Mark, in his presentation, Senator Mark speak about a number of issues, and he went on and talked about gas price, and he talked about, in some cases, the incentives not being big enough and so forth. You know, I want some of us to remember, as we talk about gas and we talk about gas levels and we talk about the fact that it is not a 3.8 billion cubic feet per day, and it's really a 3.7 or 3.6 he was trying to make us believe. The truth of the matter is, when we came, we inherited an economy with it down to 3.2. That is a little bit of reality that we all need to also face. A lot of times I have heard about what it is that we should have, what is not being done, and what could have been done. But you know, you will never hear anybody giving you any idea of how you would have managed within the state and what we presently have. And before going on, I want to bring and put that into context. Everything that we do needs to be put into context of what is the reality. The truth of the matter is, from a revenue perspective, over the last 4 years, the equivalent period, or the 5 years of revenue, based on the information and the facts before us, we are talking about $263 billion in revenue. You compare that to the 4 years and the projected revenue to come, you are talking about, over the period, the equivalent 5-year period, this country is faced with close to $60 billion less in revenue. That's a fact. So we talk about what it is and what could be and what coulda, shoulda, woulda. Put this in the context of a country that is facing $60 billion less revenue. I have heard a lot of conversation about debt and how this government borrow and taxes, and we only borrow. And I know, I want to again put on the record the level of debt that that was spent, or the amount of debt that the country incurred in the previous 5 years and in this projected 5-year. And you are talking about October 09 to September 10, this country had a debt of about $45.4 billion. That's the figure for the net public sector debt, $45.4 billion. Between the period October 14th to September 15th, right around the time when there was a change, we ended up at $76 billion. 76.5 to be exact. Do the math. You will get close to $31.5 billion in debt that was incurred. So you're talking about a government, as I said, let's compare, let's understand. All right? $31 billion in debt. I agree. Today, debt is at 102. So you're moving from 76 to 102. Do the maths again, that's about 26 billion. So as a country, faced with having to make some prudent decisions because of what you have in front of you, we are a country that operating with close to $50 to $60 billion less in income. And even when we had all that income, we still incurred close to $31 billion increase in debt. We are now operating with relatively less debt and less income because of our financial circumstances. So those are some realities that we need to face. We talked about, Senator Mark spoke about you know, well, talked about the oil companies and the fact that the amount of benefits that they were getting, right, was not real, and the types of, you need to give more tax incentives to facilitate more growth. The reality of this country is that compared to international tax benefits, as my Prime Minister always talked about, BP and those international companies, they have shareholders. We also have shareholders. The only difference is that our shareholders are the citizens. So when we came, you had a situation where a company with $5 billion in revenue, international comparative, Nigeria, the kind of income that you would have gotten with about $2 billion. So you producing 5, you getting the country getting tax and benefits of 2. In Trinidad and Tobago, the equivalent that was put in place, at the time was 5 billion to 200,000. 10 times less. 10 times. You understand? So again, putting it into context of, yes, you could want to give benefits to encourage individuals to drill. But at the end of the day, what is the sense you are encouraging individuals to drill and you talk about, and then when you end up, what are you leaving for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to live on? Those are some realities of what it is that you taught, that we had to deal with. And what we have been doing systematically over time is dealing with all of these issues, managing and bringing back our expenditure in line with our reduced income, which is $50 billion less, and trying as much as possible as to keep the ship of Trinidad and Tobago afloat, so that we could sail it into calmer waters. The series of measures that we are talking about and what we have put in place is attempting to do just that. There were a number of the measures that were mentioned in the budget, all right? And a lot of them didn't require us to come here to talk about them. And again, they were all geared, now that you have some reduction now that you have some increase in income and you have some stability, now you could try as much as possible to manage and to be able to help the less fortunate as best as you can. But as Senator Deonarine talked about, you even have to do that with a certain degree of caution, because bearing in mind the turbulent waters and some of the world forces and so forth that are around us. So that is answer to some of these statements made by, or comments made by Senator Mark when he attempted to try to, as I said, talk about it would be nice to give by the stroke of a pen. Easy to say, let's give more, let's do more. This is not going to do anything. Let's do more. But to be able to do more, who are we giving this more to? And how are we going to manage? How are we going to give up the income and still be in a position to pay the public servants, to pay and deal with the schools, to deal with the hospital bills? Bills, as I said before, are stubborn things. Whether you like it or not, they keep coming. And after after setting up this country with an appetite of $63 billion in expenditure, we now had to deal with it almost 1 year's revenue. At our best, we have $50 billion less. That's the kind of shortfall we are. That is close to 1 year of our total revenue that we have less to spend. This particular act, as I said before, it deals with some of the items that we need to come to get some legislative changes for, and this needs to be done before December the 31st. One of the areas that, as mentioned, we talked about the necessary measures, I think in clause 3C of the bill, that speaks towards putting in effect the benefits or the tax changes associated with energy efficiency solar water heaters. That particular measure, Mr. Vice President, is one that I am particularly proud about. And as I said when I made my contribution in the Senate, this is one measure of a series of measures that is geared towards trying to change our culture, all right, and trying to implement our energy efficiency and our energy conservation measures in this country. You know, Senator Sobers, in his contribution, and I wasn't there in the Senate at the time when he spoke, I suppose it is not just good to say excellent work, fantastic, keep it up, let's do it together, let's continue to do something positive, all right? It's always about trying to pelt boulders, and I was doing it before, and well, they have it, and I like it, but, you know, so let us put some of these things into perspective. And I did go and do some research, Senator Sobers, and I could shed some light, as you said, on exactly what it is. And you're right, in 2010, your government, very early o'clock, stood up and talked about the whole idea of energy audits and the need to have energy audits done in buildings across the country. 2010. At that point in time, the actual measure that was actually laid before this House was registered energy service companies. You were going to encourage registered energy service companies to go out there and do audits on buildings. And then you went further. You said when you did the audit, whatever you spent, you will get 150% tax credit. And I think we heard how beneficial tax credits are versus other benefits. We got a lesson in that from Minister West today. And yes, a good lesson. And yes, so you did say that in 2010. And you therefore said that you will have these registered energy service companies, encourage them to go and do the audits, hire these companies to do the audits. And then, because they were registered, and then we knew what they were doing, we were going to give the tax credits and therefore encourage the country to get into energy conservation type activities. That was 2010. Well, let me tell you what happened after 2010 with that measure which you put in. Between the whole of 2010 to 2011, the whole country got geared up, waiting, and a lot of companies got ready to want to implement, to do these audits. But you were supposed to put a mechanism in place to determine in the Ministry of Energy how you're going to register the energy service companies. And 2010 to 2011 passed, and the country waited, and you did nothing. 2011 to 2012 passed, and the country waited, and you did nothing. 2012 to 2013 came, and you did exactly what you did in the last 2 years, nothing. 2014 to 2015, and they waited and they waited. And like everything that you do, it is just about PR, it's just about talk. You picked 150. You picked 100, please. You picked 150% tax credit. No analysis, no discussion. It sounds good. But the reality is, Mr. Sobers, Mr. Senator Sobers, you did nothing in the area of energy efficiency, energy conservation, or renewable energy for the next 4 years of your tenure. And you did nothing about it. And therefore, even what you spoke about, even up to today, the law was set, it is on the books, it never got implemented because you did, all you were doing was mamagaying and talking, and you were not serious about it. Let me also say, you talk about your bulbs, all right? From my research, let me tell you the difference of what we're talking about. What you talked about was your minister, not even your minister of energy, was your minister of energy advisor, walking around in certain selected areas and giving out CFL bulbs, compact fluorescent bulbs. Not LED bulbs, it's CFL bulbs that you were walking around, all right? Wait, so it was, right? It was, Mr. President, could I please? You were talking about CFL bulbs that you were walking around giving in selected areas by not ministry officials, by the special advisor to the minister. When you asked the ministry, did you have a data plan? What were you trying to achieve by it? No answer. When you were asking what was the target that you were trying to achieve by this measure? No answer. What was the objective behind doing it? No answer. All right? But you want to talk now about this was your idea, and this is something that you did. And then we turn now after saying something in 2010, doing nothing for 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15. All right? We now hear, because it's now the invoked thing to talk about, all right? The invoked thing, because I consider handing out CFL bulbs as nothing. But because it was the invoked thing, you decided afterwards with your leader of the opposition standing up and now talking about all the different buildings that we'll have energy audits about, and how we're going to have a park, and how we're going to do this, and how we're going to do that, and how we're going to do the other. And I asked the question, why didn't you do anything when you were there? When you had the opportunity, and when you had as a country over $50 billion more to spend, and when you borrowed close to $31 billion more in debt, you did nothing about it. So I am extremely pleased that this government, at a time when we are fighting to keep our heads above water and trying to rebalance this economy, could take the opportunity and the forward-thinking step to put together a comprehensive energy conservation and energy efficiency plan. A plan that was developed not by us picking a number out of the air, a plan that was developed by going to the energy chamber and the chambers across the country, getting representatives, going to UE, getting representatives from the Ministry of Education, getting representatives from the Ministry of Energy, getting representatives from the Ministry of Public Utilities, and putting a plan together that talks about a comprehensive plan for energy efficiency and energy conservation that will be implemented over time. And unlike other plans, this plan specifically talks about targets that you want to achieve. Because if you're walking around a village and you're giving out bulbs, right? And you say, take this now, take this now, take this now. That's not a plan. That is not how you talk about a plan. That is not a plan. That is a giveaway scheme. That is a giveaway scheme that you are trying to mama guide people. But let us put on record again, as I did before, our plan that we talked about, when we talk about energy, when we talked about dealing with buildings and retrofitting buildings, we said we are going to lead by example. And we are going to lead by example, starting with government buildings. That's what we talked about. And we're not talking about doing it. We have not finished. We talked about it in September. We got the budget passed in November. We are in December. We talked about going and do Tower C. Tower C has started, and we have in our possession a full audit done. That is getting it done. It didn't take any sort of action. We have done it. We talked in the budget about dealing with it at schools. We talked about identifying 30 pilot schools, which we are going to go out and do. All right? Again, we are getting it done. And it is being done. It is being done. All right? We talked in addition to this measure, right? In addition to this measure, we also spoke about, and in the budget, that we talked about every single house being built from this year onwards by the HDC will also be fitted with water heaters. And as we speak and houses are being constructed, they are being fitted with solar water heating systems. That is getting it done. All right? So we have a clear idea. We talked about not only leading by example, and when people see you doing something and not just mama guiding them by saying you're going and have a registrar system for energy servicing companies and doing nothing about it. When people actually seeing you doing something, we have sat down as a group and have already had consultation with all the chambers of commerce, with all the business communities, and they are also on board in getting their own companies together with regard to doing the energy audits themselves and actually putting the measures in place themselves. So we have already done that because we are clear. When we're doing something, we could pull out a document and tell every single person, this is our plan. This is our plan. What is your plan that you're planning to, what do you plan to achieve by 2024 with regard to your energy conservation initiatives? We are trying to reduce CO2 emissions by 6 million tons. That's the plan. We have a number. You could hold us accountable for it. We are talking about $1.42 billion in investments. That's the plan. We have a number. When you are setting a target, my friend, All right? When you are setting, if it is not measured, it is not done. You have to be able to say what you're doing. That is what it is all about. And therefore, when we talked about the amount of alternative revenue that it will cost and it will be able to save, we are able to mention what it is that the natural gas savings will give this country, something like about 773 million.
Minister, thank you for giving way. Could you please indicate what plan you're reading from? What's the report you're reading from? Okay.
Energy Conservation and Energy Efficiency Policy and Action Plan document for Trinidad and Tobago 2020 to 2024. This was a plan and a document put together by a cabinet-appointed committee made up of the members of the Energy Chamber and a multifaceted team from the government that has put together an action plan dated. It was laid in cabinet in November. It was laid in cabinet in November. So when we talk again about a plan, all right, we have a plan and we have identified goals that speaks to educating the public, goals that speaks to dealing with the kids at school, goals that speaks to reducing and encouraging changing of behaviors, goals that speaks to how often you will now get your electricity bill, goals that speaks to mechanisms where you will be able to change and check what is your energy usage consumption on your phone with apps. These are all plans that are laid out, that are being rolled out with regard to energy efficiency and energy conservation. When we talked about, and this new industry is projected by 2024 to create over 4,000 jobs. So when we are speaking about energy efficiency, as I said before, I am extremely happy. Energy efficiency, energy conservation, and renewable energy. I am extremely happy on the pendulum that we have passed to ensure that we are moving now to put the solar energy on the roofs and to allow individuals the additional tax breaks to encourage them to do that. When they do that, by the way, they will result in a savings on their energy bill of close to $150 to $200. And therefore, the payback period for one of these, in addition to the tax credit that you are actually getting, it will allow for you to pay back for your water heater in under 2 to 3 years. That makes it good sense. And that is when I talk about a win-win situation. It is good for the consumer. It is good for the country, right? And it is also good for the environment. Mr. Vice President, so that is about performance. That is about performance, beating old talk, right? Now, at the end of the day also, we also spoke, when we spoke about energy efficiency and energy conservation, we also spent a lot of time in trying to develop other industries. So when we say that this energy efficiency and energy conservation is also going to create 400 jobs, we also mentioned in the budget the growth of the new industry that is coming. The new industry, when we talk about what is down the road in the future, where the future jobs going to come about, where's the next industrial estate going to come, where the revenue is going to come about, the new industry that the president of BP speaks about, that he talks about is $150 billion in size, is the hydrogen economy. the hydrogen economy, where you talk about blue hydrogen and you talk about green hydrogen. When you talk about using renewable energy to help create hydrogen, and therefore you talk about green hydrogen. And when you speak about green hydrogen, and you're talking about right now in the petrochemical sector, we presently take natural gas and extract hydrogen in the natural gas. That's why we need the natural gas. So all of the petrochemical industries, what they really need is hydrogen. And therefore, we talk about how could we create hydrogen by utilizing green hydrogen and renewable energy. So when you talk about, when we put a plan together, we are talking just not about, this is not just about us, not about putting solar panels on your roof. This is about creating a renewable and understanding how renewable energy is going to play a part in the development and the future of the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. That is how we do things. And therefore, to get to this point, it's not just about putting an incentive up there. It's about putting an incentive in the focus of a plan. We have gone as far as creating a unit in the Ministry of Public Utilities that will be responsible for the execution of this plan. And I've appointed a parliamentary secretary to see about it exclusively, because we understand that this environment is important. This environment is important to this generation, and this environment is important to all the young people out there. This environment and this future of that, what happens in that sector is going to be critical. And it's going to happen not just by old talk, but by a plan with clear targets. Clearly, as we go down and as the plan unfolds, you will be seeing work, and requires all our agencies to get involved. It also requires the Bureau of Standards to get involved, because you also need to now put incentives to encourage people to buy energy-saving devices. But when you go to the store to buy a fridge, you must be able to have somebody saying, this is the most energy-efficient device that you should pay for, and this one is the least efficient. Right? And therefore, again, if you're putting a plan together, you have to have all of those elements in it. And if you, and as we speak about what we do, what we have to do, when we talked about energy efficiency and energy conservation, we talked about creating in Tobago a zero carbon zone. How do we take energy efficiency, energy conservation, and renewable energy and bring it into the tourism sector? How do we tie the mechanism that we are promoting Tobago and beyond, and also tie it into the tourism industry? That is how you create a plan. That is how you get all arms of your sector working together. Transportation, government leading by example by doing what they have to do. Government providing the incentives so the population could get involved. Government providing the incentives to allow the private sector to get involved. And all of us moving in a certain direction with regard to having also the long-term plan to create the type of industry and put Trinidad on the map as we have been put on the map with Point Lisas and the urea and methanol and so forth in the hydrogen economy. So I am extremely, extremely proud to be part of a government with the foresight to deal with solar water heaters. Right? Solar water heaters. Because as you say, you know, Mother Teresa always made this point, you know. It talked about the fact that All of us are not always called upon to do great things. But each thing, small things that you do, we could all do small things that are great. We could all do small things that are great. And together, we will then be able to create this magnificent change that you're talking. So this is a step. This is one step. And if you put it in the context of all the other steps that have been articulated, they are there. They were all mentioned in the budget. And as you have been seeing, we have been rolling it out immediately. Government is leading by example. We just finished Tower C. We are now moving on to the Ministry of Education building. And when we move on and we finish the audit in Tower C, we are not just taking it and putting it and filing it away. We are executing on it. We are executing on it. And therefore, we are getting it done. We are getting it done. So, Mr. Vice President, I support the measures that have been put forward. I support all the initiatives. I'm particularly proud of the initiative in the credit union movement as we have dealt with that sector. Another sector that was ignored totally for the last 5 years. No change, only talk. No consultation. Again, but talk. But again, in some strategic document written by somebody, when you pull a piece from here and pull a piece from there, we are going to talk about the sleeping elephant of the credit union movement and what's supposed to happen to it and how it's going to play its rightful role. However, when it comes to action, nothing gets done. Mr. Vice President, on those few words, I thank you very much for, and I look forward to your support.
Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for recognizing me as I stand to participate in this bill on the Finance Bill 2019. Now, Mr. Vice President, I came here with a short presentation and some questions that I had relating to the bill. Initially, I was intending to speak second on our bench, but Senator Sobers ended up going second on the bench to facilitate some stuff that we had to do here. And as fate would have it, Mr. Vice President, I have to speak after that presentation by the Minister of Public Utilities. And what started off as a short presentation with some questions would now be morphed into a presentation that has to correct a number of inaccuracies, starting with the first paragraph of the Minister of Public Utilities presentation here today. And how the Minister, and I'll tell you this, sir, of everybody on our bench, I came here fully prepared not to talk about the events of December 2nd, 2019. I had no intention of speaking on the elections because of all of us here, I spoke enough on the elections in the last week and a half. But how the Minister of Public Utilities started his presentation here today with the usual story, the sad story of what they met when they came into office. If nothing else was instructive as to why they lost on December 2nd, is the commitment to that political fiction that they tried to feed the population time and time again. Mr. Vice President, they spoke about, the minister started off by saying, we are in these stringent times and they all managed to survive with proper economic management and they had so little to work with. And the thing about it is if the population believed them in 2015, which clearly they did because they were voted into office on that political narrative, that they'll fix this broken economy, it is very clear that the population will no longer believe them in 2019. Because this is a government that comes every single time to talk about priorities and say, look, we couldn't give the people X, Y, and Z because we had no money. You couldn't get this because we had no money. And then on December 6th, 2019, in the Newsday, there's a headline article, PM's house in Tobago, PM's Tobago residents ready for December 21st party. Right? Ready for December. This is the no money gang, right? They had no money. We were trying to squeeze little bits to get something for the people, and maybe we couldn't. No. Yes, a house for the state. But the question becomes one of,
Please allow the member to make a contribution and just monitor the levels of noise in the chamber.
thank you, Mr. Vice President. I understand sometimes that they get uncomfortable. I understand that they get uncomfortable. And despite the noise, Mr. Vice President, I can assure you that the people of Trinidad and Tobago always hear what I am saying. So you could try, but you wouldn't succeed, right? Mr. Vice President, the reason I raised
Mr. Vice President, I just want to stand on Standing Order 51(1)(e). The Minister of Labour and also Senator Cummings is disturbing my friend.
Honourable members, that's why I ruled in terms of the noise level in the chamber, not only for my ability to be able to hear the speaker speaking, but to allow the person contributing to be able to, one, hear themselves, as well as to make the contribution that they need to make. So could we just monitor the noise level in the chamber as it relates to crosstalk and everything else? Continue, Senator Haynes.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I raised the point of the PM's residents in Tobago, not because it flies in the face of the question of priorities. When you stand before a population and you say job cuts had to be done because we couldn't afford to pay salaries, etc. We're trying to do X and we're trying to do Y. And you can't get this because we don't have any money. And lower your expectations, saying to everybody in the population, lower your expectations, tighten your belt, etc. And you continue that narrative. And then on December 6, 2019, you, as a citizen of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, can read a headline in the newspaper, PM's Tobago residents ready for the December 21st party. It is a slap in the face of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. To come here again and say to us that we've been managing and now that there may be a little bit extra, we can now see about trying to alleviate the burden on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Again, it insults the intelligence of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I stood here in 2017. Now, 2017 was before the year of the turnaround economy. I stood here in 2017 and I said, the most basic pedestrian level politics you can practice is to start off by saying, Treasury empty, 2015, nothing, we can't do anything, tighten your belt. 2016, you continue, we're trying something. And I said it in 2017, that by 2018, we'll start to hear a different song. And lo and behold, by 2018, we were hearing that we could see clearly now and the economy was turning around. That's not shocking to anybody that understands when you are trying to use constant political propaganda and a political narrative rather than trying to serve the interests of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I made that point because I said to myself, no way in 2019 anybody could seriously think that would work as an election ploy, as a strategy. No way. Little did I know, Mr. Vice President, that they would really try it. And they did. Because after the turnaround, 2018, that happened early 2018, and then we had the shutdown of Petroleum in the year of the turnaround. In the year of the turnaround, when you heard about the shutdown of Petroleum, oh no, you just spoke. Next time, right? In 2018, when you heard about the turnaround and the shutdown of Petroleum, you then heard various ministers coming out to say that employment numbers were steady and that there's not an unemployment problem in Trinidad and Tobago. People are working. Now, they were saying this to persons who had just lost their job. And I said, again, Mr. Vice President, well, they can't be serious. They can't be serious. Because it is gaslighting our population that is living in a certain set of circumstances and having members of the government come on various arms of the media, various TV stations and say, what you are experiencing simply isn't so. That is gaslighting. And I said they're gaslighting the population. And they continued. Now, Mr. Vice President, 2019, today it is what, December 10th, 2019. To stand here and tell us that this is a government that had to manage with 50 billion or less, and that they had to prioritize, and they had to, people couldn't get what they wanted. To come here on December 10th, when all of November and all of October, this same Trinidad and Tobago saw massive amounts of spending by this same government. Mr. Vice President, it has to be some measure of insanity coming from that side of the bench at this point in time. Because I listened to the Minister of Public Utilities come and tell us about they had to manage, and he's proud that they were able to scrape up a little bit X, Y, and Z here. And then, why wait till November 2019 to give the residents of Rosilac the lights that they were asking for the 4 years, right? All of a sudden, and then I heard the Minister of Public Utilities speak with pride about the solar water heater initiative. Good initiative. Mr. Vice President, what water passing through the solar water heaters? Because the people in Trinidad and Tobago are asking for water all now. Still, to this day. The minister sought to pour scorn on the bulb initiative that we were advisors were walking around handing out bulbs. Perhaps if you had implemented the walking about strategy, perhaps you all would have done a little bit better. Then don't drive past people, walk about, get them something, maybe. But Mr. Vice President, the reason the minister sought and talking about who was walking where and that we had a plan, but we didn't implement it, but then spoke about walking about to give out the bulbs, which is in fact implementation. Mr. Vice President, I listened to the Minister of Public Utilities, and I understood why what happened on December 2nd happened. The UNC absolutely did a lot of work to ensure our victory on December 2nd, but the lack of work from the PNM, the lack of work, the lack of delivery, the commitment to a narrative of excuses, the commitment to a narrative of saying we had nothing, while we can look in the newspapers, we can look at various levels of expenditure across the last 4 years and know that they are looking at us and telling us a blatant untruth because they have been spending money. Their priorities are just skewed. And I listened to the Minister of Public Utilities come here again and tell us that we in the UNC are about talk. And you could appreciate when people try to imitate something that they thought worked well, yes? Because we did in fact say that the UNC works and the PNM talks, and the minister liked it so much that he tried. But the reason that line works for us, it is because we did not create that out of thin air. It is a fact that the UNC works. We have actual deliverables that you can point to, that you can see. It is a fact that between 2010 and 2015, people were better off than they are today. It is a fact that the reason you never hear, it is a fact, Mr. Vice President, that the reason you never hear members of the government mention 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019 is because, like the rest of the nation, the PNM wish those years didn't exist either. So they pretend it never happened. So you will always hear about 2010 to 2015, but their entire Minister of Public Utilities came here and read from a document, very proudly, the energy policy document, and stated that the policy document, in response to our question, is a document, the energy policy 2020 to 2024. The minister said today that that policy document was laid before the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago in November. Senator Hussein did a quick check of the ministers, because we fact check everything quickly, of the minister, the same Minister of Public Utilities, the budget contribution on October 25th, 2019. This House speaking on the same energy policy document, saying that it was in front of the Cabinet in October, before the budget, ready for action and implementation. So, no, but that's not the point, you know. The point isn't just the idea of the month. It's that this government of announcements, right? You come here, you read from an energy policy document that you date 2020 to 2024, like you weren't in power since 2015. So what were you doing for the last 4 years? How insulting is it that you spend 4 years to come up with a policy document and dare to think we're giving you a chance to implement it 2020 to 2024? No, when we get into power, we'll read it, we'll see if it's any good, and then we'll let you know what can be implemented. Because I guarantee you that after 4 years in government, to stand up here and proudly state, I have a policy document dated 2020 to 2024, it is a level of insanity that we cannot accept as the people of Trinidad. And then the minister again went through very great pains to mention that they had a plan, they have deliverables. I know where that come from, you know. You know why? It's too little, too late, right? Yes, we stand here and we say you never had a plan to govern. The plan we were asking for was for 2015. Because when you asked for the mandate to govern the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we said don't do it on political propaganda. Present a plan to the people of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015. You can't tell me you govern with no plan the end of 2015, all of 2016, all of 2017, all of 2018, and now all of 2019, and come today in December 2019 with an election in 2030 to tell me you have a plan now? I don't want to hear that, right? What I want to hear now is what have you done in those 4 years? And to tell me, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Vice President, that you are getting it done. I mean, if nothing else but their licks, before that, it was the getting it done thing. Because we stood here, right? You had 4 years. 4 years. Can't point to a single thing that you did. Cannot point to a single thing that you did. And look at me as a citizen of this country and say, I am getting it done. I mean, come on. Come on. And no wonder, Mr. Vice President, they didn't walk about this country because they understood what was going to happen if you went in front of people's houses. You had to drive past. You're right. You implemented the only political strategy you could have after doing what you did for the last 4 years, which was absolutely nothing. Mr. Vice, yes, we heard a lot, Mr. Vice President. There was a statement I learned, and I have no problem saying it, I learned it in this parliament, from Minister Rambarat, and then Senator Hussein explained what it meant to me, that dog eat your shame. Absolutely, dog eat the Minister of Public Utilities shame. Absolutely. Right? And it is...
Senator, just guidance, not on the commentary, but as much as you're responding to the minister's contribution, do remember that there is a bill in front of us with a number of initiatives in it. So you spent almost, I think, 18 minutes responding specifically to one contributor when we've had several. So I'm going to ask you to, at least try to get to the other parts of the bill if you have any other comments on that.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And I understood I was actually really about to give the Minister of Public Utilities the ease up that he so clearly needs after that superior defeat. And that is, we will put that to rest now. But like I said, it really was an intervention of fate because I was supposed to speak before him, so he would have got away. Right? And and now I really would get to the point. The part of the bill that I looked at was the tax credits. That the minister, and we agree that tax credits are a good thing. As we look at the legislation as presented before us, what we're looking to do is to implement measures put before us in the appropriation bill of 2019. And key in us talking about implementation and going forward with measures that may have been announced is that the population, not the opposition, but the population must trust that the government has the ability to effectively and efficiently implement measures that they have promised. And I listened to the minister on the tax credits, and I have in my possession right now a letter. Now, this person actually reached out to Senator Mark, and Senator Mark asked me to raise this in my contribution because as part of our work in opposition, a lot of people reach out to us when they hear certain things are coming before the Parliament and they want us to raise their particular issues. And this person reached out with a complaint about their tax refunds that are still owed to them. And when we can come here and talk about tax credits and all of the good things that can come from the issuing tax credits, and the persons will benefit and it will be an eventual benefit to the citizens, the only way you can do that is if you pay out the benefits. And this person wrote to Senator Mark talking about being a poor person who was awaiting his tax returns from the Board of Inland Revenue since 2016. $22,000 is owed to this person since 2016. And the person wrote from Tacarigua, wrote to Senator Mark and spoke about doing all the right things, submitting the forms as they're supposed to be submitted, checking in with customer service 2 months ago, and the person is a pensioner as well, and doing all of the right things and trying to follow all of the steps and can't get the $22,000 that's owed to them for over 4 years. And so when we come to the Parliament and we talk about tax credits and we talk about the benefits, Mr. Vice President, we have to ensure, I think, that those benefits pass on to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, else it's just all talk. It is just us saying and patting ourselves on the back for initiatives that we may announce, and then people aren't seeing the benefits because the system has a lag. And I, in preparation for today, looked at where tax credits are available already in the system, and I used the TT Connect page to get one source of government information. And there's a venture capital tax credit space. And I said, well, let me see how this thing works. Going to TT Connect. You know, Mr. Vice President, as I clicked on the link to get more information about the venture capital tax credit, it doesn't work. The number does not work. So it shows you that you put certain things into the system, and then the system falls through, and we'll talk all about benefits, and this is why people feel disenchanted with the system of governance that we have, because we'll talk about things, we'll mention these big plans, and then you don't ever get the benefit of it. And on the solar water heaters issue, I listened again to various ministers and the commentary around it, and giving the tax credit, which is the 100% tax credit with the maximum of $10,000 to be spent on this. And I reflected on my own experiences in Trinidad and Tobago as it stands right now. And I'm left to wonder, you know, who's really going to be willing to make that $10,000 investment in solar water heaters right now in Trinidad and Tobago? There's a sense of job insecurity. There's an overall sense of people being worried about their financial circumstances as it stands right now. And therefore, you put this policy in place and you said, yes, it's for the environment. And Minister of Public Utilities is in fact right. Young people, and I think almost all people, ought to care about the environment. And we ought to do what we can to be more environmentally conscious and sensitive. And, you know, the tax credit is a good thing, but there were so many things in train from the 2010 to 2015 period. And I would have no problem, and I'm sure they can all get it. There's an achievement document 2014 where policy shift 1 speaks about all of the environmentally conscious and environmentally sensitive initiatives that the People's Partnership Administration would have enacted between the years 2010 to 2014. And all the present administration needed to do was to continue some of those initiatives, and we would have been in a much better place now instead of trying to reinvent the wheel and write new energy policy documents left, right, and center. Government is about continuation, and you should have just continued some of those policies that were in train. Mr. Vice President, as I thought about what we were brought before the Parliament, and we're talking about implementation of government policy, and the reason people, the Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Minister of Public Administration, as she closed, said to us, lend us your support today as we get these initiatives working. And I listened to that. And for the last 2 debates in this House, the opposition has we've supported the government's initiative. But in the last time we met, we supported with a series of warnings about their implementation, Mr. Vice President. And as you ask for our support here today, and we say, okay, we have some questions as to how you intend to implement some of these things. Our warnings show to be true, because if you look at what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago today, our warnings from Saturday are showing to be very true today, as there's chaos around Trinidad and Tobago with the government's ineffective implementation of another policy initiative. And when you come before us and you ask for our support, as with all of these measures, and you seek to implement some of the things that you've promised, understand that making a promise and implementation are 2 different things. And I think that what you need to do is ensure that systems are in place to properly implement any of these things that you're promising. And I noted, Mr. Vice President, as I close, that we referred to the budget of 2019 as coming soon. Everything seemed to be coming soon, coming in 2020. And so they're trying to put some of these things quickly into place, these initiatives here. And I expect that the government is going to come to us for a number of things to get rolling in the 2020 era. And the caution that I am urging here today is that despite next year being an election year, you are still the government until the election. So therefore, do not implement things for the purposes of an election that will create chaos, Mr. Vice President, that will create chaos for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Right? No, and you see, that's the thing. Because you see, I listen, right? And I've raised this before. The question wasn't, and I've had to raise this, you see, sometimes I say things and it causes a little bit of excitement, I understand, right? But the choices aren't do things for election or do nothing. Those aren't the choices. There's a whole space to govern in between there. What I'm saying is do not use your seat of government for blatant electioneering. That's 2 completely different things. That is 2 completely different things. And I mean, I would be happy. Mr. Vice President, to explain the difference to the members, right? But I wouldn't use my time here today. And I would say, Mr. Vice President, that as you try to implement things in haste, remember and put always at the center the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Thompson, aye.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I think I tend to clean my spectacles before I come into the chamber, so I'm able to pick up little errors. And the first error I picked up is in clause 7, because I am absolutely sure that there are 2 letters missing from clause 7. Please. Madam Minister, before the word 5,000, I'm sure there should have been 2 letters there, US. So the correction will be made. Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak in this debate on a subject that is close to my heart and close to the pocket of many of our citizens. On this finance bill, I wish to zero in on clause 8, and I must say that when I presented on the budget, I shared out kudos to the Minister of Labor and said she was always well prepared and she had a team behind her and she was very happy. I'm afraid I have to take that back this afternoon.
How can you?
Because we do and will disagree on her interpretation of the facts and circumstances with regard to this particular clause. Now, this is a matter, the one embodied in clause 8, that affects the underprivileged to a large extent in this society. And I am committed to assist them in their quest for justice, their quest to get a fair chance and fair play in the society. And I would wish to see that those who have passed on to the great beyond, because their will has been thwarted, may be able to rest in peace. Now, I stand here not as a school child with index finger to forehead, begging permission, please, of his school teacher. I stand here with a demand for an entitlement, which should be the right of persons who very often have nobody to look after their interests, and who sometimes are made to survive on the crumbs handed out in the society, and who must say thank you for really what should be their entitlement. So today we are supposed to be grateful to the government because we're moving the entitlement of a nominated beneficiary from $5,000 to $50,000. Now, over the years, I've sat on the boards of 2 credit unions, Cathedral Credit Union and UV Credit Union. And I know the story. And I must disagree when the minister said that people are happy about this provision. Credit unions may be called the big black hope of many persons in society. It wasn't started centuries ago, but a mere 77 years or so ago. A Catholic Jesuit priest, Father Sullivan, brought credit unions from England, the whole concept, to Jamaica and Belize. And one of our citizens, T. Malcolm Milne, whom I remember very well as a well-respected solicitor in this country, heard about it. He traveled to Jamaica. He linked up with Father Sullivan, and he brought credit unionism into Trinidad and Tobago. Sadly, Malcolm Mill passed on in 2002. He described credit unions as an economic emancipator to protect the citizens from unscrupulous moneylenders. So credit unions have been introduced into Trinidad and Tobago through the efforts and guidance of Father Sullivan, became a blessing to many. It was the savior of many who otherwise would not have been able to afford appliances for their homes, to repair their homes, to invest in business, to educate their children, and to obtain loans for a variety of things. So it started with 25 cents a week, and we know what it is like today. So you become a credit union member, and you are saved from many of the rapacious practices that characterize the usages of some banks. They penalize you because you don't want to use internet banking, because you dare to come to the counter for a withdrawal or to put in money. If your balance is too low, you lose money. If you receive money from abroad or you send money abroad, you have to pay. And at the end of the year, you read in the newspaper about these obscene profits. But when you join a credit union, the profits that accrue become your profits. Not for profit, not for charity, but for service. That's what guides credit unions. Sometimes, originally I didn't appreciate the importance of credit unions. I remember going to get a loan from a bank on the East-West corridor. I approached the bank and I said I wanted to buy a property. And the loan manager said, "You're married?" I said, "Yes." I didn't ask him the relevance of it, perhaps in one of my more docile moments. "Where's your husband?" "He's at work." "So what you come here for without your husband?" I said, "I came to get money to buy a property." He said, "But you're married, you're not supposed." I said, "We have a matrimonial home, this has nothing to do with my matrimonial home. And my husband and I have discussed it." He was so upset with me. I looked at him and I said, "I don't need this loan, And I walked out of the bank and I went to UE Credit Union, took my loan, hallelujah. I really regretted that when we were buying our home, I didn't listen to my husband as an obedient wife. Not so much, as the, don't want to go overboard like the pastor in Wayne Chan's funeral, about obedience and so on. But I must say, at the end of the day, when you're paying on the reducing balance, as against when you look at the amortization schedule, when you borrow money from the bank, you realize the credit union is a savior. Now, this matter of Clause 8 has been a bone of contention for several years. It's nothing new. And I dare say there's no logical reason for it. It is unfair, it is unjust, it causes inconvenience and suffering, and it delays beneficiaries who are nominated from their entitlements. It causes them to incur unnecessary expense if all that the deceased owned was what's in the credit union. So a credit union member has nominated someone, usually a family member, to receive on the death of that member his entitlement. And what does the law say? When we look at the Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 8103, if I may read, Mr. Vice President, it says in 41, so I want to read 41.1 before we go to 3, which is the bugbear. Where a person has been nominated as beneficiary by a member in accordance with the bylaws of a society and such nominee is admitted to membership in the society shall retain 1 year of the death of the member by whom the nomination was made, transfer the shares or interests of such deceased member, subject to the limits specified in subsection 3 to the nominee. And that restriction is $5,000, which we now want to raise to $50,000. Where, however, such nominee is not admitted to membership, so you're not a member of the credit union, or where deceased member made no such nomination, the society shall retain 1 year of the death of such deceased member, pay to the nominee or legal personal representative of the deceased member, as the case may be, such sum not exceeding the said limit, which is the limit as it is now, which we're seeking to increase, representing the value or part thereof of deceased member shares or interest in the society. And nothing in this section shall be construed as prohibiting a nominee who has been admitted to membership from electing to receive payment representing the value of deceased member shares or interest instead of accepting a transfer. So you can either have that deceased member shares transferred to you, or you can get the value of the shares. But then it is limited to $5,000 of the shareholding of that member. And there's another bramble in the briar patch. Last year, I wrote a credit union. I'd been doing an estate like my friend here, Mr. Sobers, Senator Sobers, and I wanted to update the estate inventory. So I knew the credit union had an AGM, so I called and I said, I had written to you all, I wanted to know what is the present shareholding of my client. And the manager said, the account is the same. I said, but you just had an AGM and you declared a dividend. Well, that money is put in a suspense account, and therefore, no interest accrues to that account. I say, you must be crazy. And that is the kind of nonsense that goes on. Because, really and truly, that should not happen. And my credit union, I must say, when I inquired of them, they say they don't do that. Because the money is there, the money is being used, and therefore it should go on the members' shares. It should increase just like the other members of the society. Now, when I saw this provision, I decided that I would take a trip around the Caribbean, not courtesy Caribbean Airlines, but I would use my computer. So I wanted to know what happens in the other jurisdiction. So I looked at Grenada, Cooperative Societies Act, Act number 8 of 2011, section 103. And it says, on the death of a member of a cooperative society, where a person has been nominated by the member in accordance with section 106, and the nominee is admitted to membership of the cooperative society shall within 1 year of the death of the member by whom the nomination was made, transfer the shares or interests of such deceased member to the nominee. Did you hear anything about subject to anything? Any limitation of any amount? Not at all. On the death of a member of a cooperative society, where a person has been nominated by the member in accordance with section 106, has not been admitted to membership of the cooperative society, or where the deceased member made no such nomination, the cooperative society shall, within 1 year of the death of the member, pay either to the nominee or to the legal personal representative of the deceased member such sum as represents the value or part thereof of deceased member shares or interest in the cooperative society. And I looked at Jamaica Cooperative Societies Act as well. Act number 75 of 1950, section 19, section 18 and 19, dealing with the same issue. And there is absolutely no limitation with regard to transfer of shares or membership on the death of a member. The registered society shall transfer to any person nominated in accordance with the provisions of section 18 the property of deceased member or such property as may have accrued thereon, and then transfer to the personal representative of deceased member any property or such property and so on if there is no nomination and so on. I looked at the Bahamas legislation, Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 314 of 2005. I look at Section 38 and 39. Again, it's the same question of transferring subject to subsection 2, the transfer of a share or interest of a member or deceased member in the capital of a society shall be subject to such condition as may be prescribed by under the Act. No share or interest or any part thereof in the capital may be transferred unless the transfer is made to a member thereof or to a person whose application for membership. And of course, you did question of how it's done in nomination, instrument in writing signed by the member in the presence of 2 witnesses and so on. I looked at Guyana Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 8801 of 1948, Section 17, the same terms. I said, okay, let me go further north. I looked at Canada Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter C35 of the Revised Statutes of Newfoundland. And again, when I looked at Section 35, it says, a registered society shall, in the death of a member, transfer the share or interest of that member to the person nominated in accordance with this act and the regulation to receive the share or interest, or to the person representative of the deceased member, and it goes on. I said, let me go to my friend Chief Justice Ma's jurisdiction in Hong Kong. So let me travel down in the east now. Cooperative Societies Ordinance, Chapter 33 of 1951, Section 17. Because I say I must travel the world to find out why this thing is going on here, you know. On the death of a member, a registered Section 17, a registered society may transfer the share or interest of the deceased member to the person nominated in accordance with the rules made in this behalf, or if there is no person so nominated, to such person as may appear to the committee to be the heir or legal representative of the deceased member, or may pay to such nominee, heir, or legal representative, as the case may be, a sum representing the value of such member's share or interest as ascertained in accordance with the rules of bylaws and so on. I even went to Africa, to the Cooperative Societies Act, Chapter 490 of the Revised Laws of Kenya. And I said to myself, again, the same terms, no restriction, no telling me that you must have a part of it, 50,000 or 60,000 or how many rupees or anything like that, you know. And I said to myself, what is going on in Trinidad and Tobago? Why do we have to put up with this nonsense? And I'm saying, I heard the minister talk about protection and so on, and I asked myself, that's odd. That's very odd. Because right here in Trinidad and Tobago, we enacted a piece of legislation called the Unit Trust Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago, Act 26 of 1981. What did we do then? Section 43 of that act states as follows. Now I want to read it very slowly. Where a unit holder has nominated any person to receive any monies in respect of units held by him, such monies shall, upon the death of the unit holder, and subject to any right, title, or other interest of any other person, and to any charge, encumbrance, tax, or duty of any nature, payable in respect of the said units, be payable to the nominee. A payment by the trust under subsection 1 shall be a full discharge of the trust from all liability in respect of the units. So you can die today, and your family can get all the money you have in unit trust once they're nominated. What is wrong with credit union members? Is it that we feel that those in unit trust are of a higher caliber, and those in credit unions do not know how to run their business? We've come a long way from the 1940s, when credit unions first began, and when you had paltry sums of money in the credit union. Over the years, we've had people who have done wonders and have shown how credit union can be a viable business. Louis Lee Singh, Donovan Palmer, Emile de la Grenade, Jill Thompson, some of them still alive, Esme Raphael, Christopher Holder, still with us. A large number of our citizens are members of credit union. I recall in 1985 attending the World Credit Union Conference in London. At the opening ceremony, they called on people from various jurisdictions. They called the country, and everybody from the countries had to stand up. And when they called Trinidad and Tobago, and I looked around, it was the largest contingent in the whole of London at that hotel. So today our credit union have billions of dollars in assets. They are monitored and they are supervised. You have the Stabilization Fund, you have the Commission of Cooperatives, you have the Central Bank. They now hire people who are qualified and competent to perform their duties. They have come a
Mr. Vice President, not the central bank. The credit unions are not under the central bank.
Thank you. But there is some provision, you know, that I saw where there is some relationship. All right. All right. So they now hire people to a large extent who are qualified. In those days, you had somebody who says he's a manager. Sometimes he can't do a real good statement. But things have changed over the years. We've come a long way, like Virginia Slims, and they know what to do. We know what we want, and we know what we do not want. What we want is for this clause to be excised from the law, expunged. There is no good and valid reason why we must have this provision in our statute books. The law should be changed forthwith, now, pronto, immediately, Honorable Minister. Before you beg to move, I ask you to remove that clause. Thank you.
Minister. Senator Dial Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for allowing me to speak on this bill, the financial bill of 2019. On this bill, I looked at it as really a realization and a legalization of the 2020 budget statement. It's really to give teeth to the budget statement to see if we can give it life. Because, again, we have to have this, this budget statement enacted by, I think, January 1st, 2020. So, Mr. Vice President, the reference, when I looked at this bill, it looked at different aspects. It looked at the income tax bill, the Income Tax Act. It looked at the Corporation Tax Act, the Petroleum Taxes Act, Customs Act, Cooperative Society Act, and Treasury Bill Act. And I would like to just make reference to certain parts that, certain parts of the discussion that came up from different sides that, you know, that looked into this piece of legislation. I looked at it and I'm thinking that, you know, what is the good of this financial bill? It really, I would judge the elements of it as a success if it really could stimulate certain aspects of the economy, if it could stimulate business, if it can help with foreign exchange, if it can help. Sure. Sure. Good. Good. That's it. Oh, sure, good, good. If it can help with the unemployment. So this is what I'm looking at. If pieces of this legislation can help with this, then I'm saying it will stimulate the economy and will give us that much needed help. But I have to, you know, I also have to echo the sentiments of, you know, Senator Mark and also Senator Deonarang, when, you know, they were a bit alarmed at the fact that, you know, when you're looking at the Treasury Bill Act, it seeks to go and at least increase the borrowing capability of the government. And I think this is a little bit frightening in the sense that if you keep borrowing, it means that eventually, somewhere down the line, our children, our grandchildren will have to look and see how they could, you know, service these bills. So that, I think, this had me a little level of discomfort. And as I mentioned, I would hope, you know, that this borrowing aspects, you know, that occurs, that somehow we could get some idea from the government how we could actually get the monies in the future to pay back this this money that we borrow. And as you know, it came like a thief in the night, this piece of legislation. And I think this was the only aspect of this bill that I had some reservations, some, you know, mixed feelings about. But looking at the others, I want to make mention of the fact that when I looked at the amendments, Mr. Vice President, of the income tax bill, where we looked at, you know, chapter, you know, 75.01, it deals with looking at making provisions for an increase in the solar water heating equipment tax credit. A lot of members mentioned the benefits, and I totally agree with this. It's a move in the right direction. Minister Leon actually spoke about the light bulbs, the LED bulbs, the fact that government have to, will seek to go into the interest to get a cleaner environment, to see if we can somehow have a global scenario that, we are actually, we have signed on to. Because, Mr. Vice President, as we know, we had a recently concluded inter-parliamentary union meeting here for 2 days, and we had signed on to the global, there are certain global goals that unions and, parliamentarian unions right over the world had said, let's go to these goals. Let's see if we can get a cleaner society. Let's see if we can have, sustainable development goals of the UN materialized. And part of those goals was really to get a cleaner environment. Trinidad, I think when I went to that meeting, somebody had mentioned we are number 3 in the CO2 emissions per capita. And, so therefore, definitely, we are a country that will have to show that we are on the right path, and we are cognizant of what's going on, and we are looking at the fact that, we have to do our part as a signatory to this United Nations declaration. And even when we had signed on to the Paris Agreement, Mr. Vice President, Trinidad has made a pledge that we will reduce our total greenhouse gas emissions from 15% from industry, power generation, and transport sector by 2030. And as we mentioned, we are on the right path. We are looking at the cars now run by electricity. We are looking at, as I say, LED lights. We are looking at other means that we are moving towards it. So this piece of legislation here, I would support entirely. Barbados has been the leaders so far in looking at the solar panels that they have given to their residents for their water heaters, and I'm thinking we could learn from them. A cleaner world, a cleaner country. This, I think, is something commendable, and this is something I think I would support 100%. Looking at pieces of the other legislation, Mr. Vice President, the Corporation Tax Act. This act, this got me a little, concerned in the sense that I think it was 2 years ago, the same government actually increased, I think, raised the taxes for the corporate world there. And certain small businesses actually had complained. And there was a CNC3 report on Monday, the 2017, October the 2nd, where the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturer Association actually complained that this increase in 30% of taxes will do an injustice to the small and medium enterprise. And actually, they mentioned the fact that certain business places will have no choice but to fold up, and it's a strain on the business, on the small business. So this was mentioned. So looking at this piece of legislation here, which served to give some sort of relief, and when you looked at the amount of the Corporation Tax Act, the amendments to it, and we see some of the reliefs that it sought to give, I think probably the government had opened its eyes that, hey, this is the time now to try to re-stimulate the local business community, and even to try to even get local businesses to invest outside, because part of this piece of legislation serves to encourage persons to take their business outside. And I noticed a change, Mr. Vice President. In the past, the act that we had previously, the Corporation Tax Act, it really restricted the business ventures in CARICOM regions. And I think the restriction was due to that. If you go to give any sort of incentive to our local business people here, it will be unfair to the other CARICOM persons. So that restriction, I think Senator Dienerang mentioned that was so. But as it may be, this serves to say that if you are first-time business, on a first-time business venture, you can go to another CARICOM nation and you can actually promote your business there. And there are actually incentives to help people, like promotional expenses that you can actually apply for that could help meet your business venture, like going on a plane trip, exporting your service to others. And at least this would, to me, this would help stimulate a small business person who has their business and wants to export. And this could only do us good, I think, if we can go out, establish a business there, and bring in some foreign currency. So this is something, again, I look at that an incentive that will help our export to the rest of the CARICOM nations on a first-time basis, but also export to other nations. This incentive that has increased. And it's promotional expensive that, for all these years, from when this act was first, when this act first came out, obviously there's an increase in expenditure, plane tickets, business, hotels, all these dealings, and this keeps to the fact that it keeps up with the time. One aspect I have, Mr. Vice President, that I must look at is when I looked at the whole act, right? It actually looked at certain activities where your company, if they are doing certain ventures, they will have that tax benefit up to a maximum of $3 million. And most of those ventures were now increased to $6 million. So again, you could look at this and see it's a good venture. So we look at if there's a company, for instance, if you look at 10J of the Act, you would see the Corporation Tax Act. You would see that where a company sponsors audio-visual or video productions for the purpose of local education or local entertainment or reflecting local culture for radio or television, there shall be allowed as a deduction in ascertaining the chargeable profits of the company for that year of income. So this serves really to help promote local culture. And I think it is commendable that we can look at that 3 million and increase it to 6 million. And hopefully we can get the impetus going where people may say, well, local culture is not really promoted. There's a lack of persons going to calypso tents. There's persons who may not be able to promote their goods and even to cut those videos. And again, this can help definitely with that local culture. 10K looked at also a production company who also does this same venture. So a company who sponsors can benefit as well as a production company themselves. So it can actually encourage persons to, if I have a company, to hire out a company to do this local production, or some young persons can get together and apply for a small business loan and own their own production company and see if they can now get these benefits, because the benefits will be there. It went on to other benefits. We're looking at sporting activities, artistic works, all those are mentioned in various parts of the legislation, 10L, 10M. So it encourages these aspects. So we looked at the fact that performing arts, and in respect of visual work of art, we look at 10G, and I'm looking at 10G2. In respect of a visual work of art, A, the deduction may only be claimed in respect of the initial acquisition of the work, and B, the deduction may be allowed where the work, 1, is done by a national of Trinidad and Tobago, and B, is certified by an art gallery, which shall submit evaluation of the work done. Now, Mr. Vice President, this aspect here, the art gallery, I think this, we have to look at art, we have to look at religion, we have to look at, any sort of religion, ethnic imbalance, any sort of areas of culture. It tends to sometimes, I find in this country, bring up a lot of old talk, a lot of heated arguments. People will speak about, you're forgetting this culture, you're not supporting Ram Leela, but you're supporting Calypso and Carnival. So you will always have, I've always been getting this discussion from, since I'm young. You will always have, from time to time, you will have people cry discrimination, even some people may say, who say you don't look at that as a cultural form. And when I look at pieces of legislation, and I'm seeing here that if we are going to give private companies the right to get a tax benefit from, supporting artists, we should make sure that they do it in such a way that's transparent and that everyone, every race, every culture, every religion, every artistic group will have the opportunity to say, well, look, this is my piece of art compared to another person's art. It is just as good. This is my culture compared to another culture. So what I'm saying is, if we are going to use taxpayers' money to support business ventures, we have to know that they have equal opportunity to persons to come on board and say, listen, let me display my art. And even, you remember in the past, Mr. Vice President, art and art pieces has caused a lot of controversy in our country. We saw a beautiful masterpiece by one of our top artists. I think it was paid millions of dollars for, caused some concern about that cost. We've seen a member of Parliament's daughter had some art piece that was sold, it caused some problems. So anytime you're looking with like art and artists, we have to know who's going to judge the pieces of art. So we'll have to know who are the art galleries, who will be really seeing that this is an art piece that it is worth to say that, it will be given a tax benefit. So I'm just saying we have to be careful. We have to put things in place that nobody will be able to point fingers and say that, these companies are being used by any particular persons to get favors done or art pieces sold. And why I mentioned that, Mr. Vice President, because again, if I go down to 10G3, in the case of a performing art, the deduction shall only apply where A, the work is done by a national of Trinidad and Tobago, and B, the national rendering such work is registered with the ministry which is responsible for culture, or with the Tobago House of Assembly, in the case of a national residing in Tobago. And 4, in this case, artistic work means any work of art, whether visual or performing. So, Mr. Vice President, while I support this, I am saying whoever is in the ministry to judge what is art, what is culture, what could be applied for this, whoever is in that ministry is just really in it's a position that, they may satisfy some, may not satisfy some. They may be in a ministry where if they deem certain things as better art value of another, they may be opening up a can of worms. So what I'm asking for is people who are in these positions in the ministry should have a level of what you call cultural competency, where they may be able to be sensitive and appreciate the culture of each and everyone in our multicultural society. And why I say that is we wouldn't like certain companies to get certain tax benefits for certain art pieces, for certain cultural pieces, and persons turn around now and make one set of confusion after and said, oh, they were biased, they were racist, they didn't like their culture, they didn't like certain things. So put things in place, and this is all I'm begging, to prevent any sort of headaches down the future. Because I find when I have to hear these talk over and over, it upsets me, and I'm sure it upsets a lot of the persons. So put things in place, transparent, bodies who could judge these pieces of all races, all religious organizations who can be there and look at these things. And why I mentioned that also, Mr. Vice President, I look at 10H. In ascertaining the chargeable profits of the company for a year of income commencing from the year 2000, they shall be allowed the actual expenses incurred in granting scholarships to nationals who are not employees, directors, or associates of the company. So again, right now, these companies can give scholarships, tertiary education at institutions in these areas of studies accredited and approved respectively by the ministry and with responsibility for education. Mr. Vice President, in medicine, I have heard allegations made that people have gotten scholarships from different ministries for medicine and other disciplines, and persons wonder how they got those scholarships. Fingers maybe have been pointed, say it's nepotism, it was this one or this one's family and whatnot. So I'm saying to prevent that, all I'm saying is yes, this piece of legislation can help a young person really get a scholarship if that young person's in sports, or even a young person in education in a certain area and really needs a scholarship. A company with a kind heart could really get that person to a level where that person could get a tertiary education or a sports scholarship. But again, we don't want misuse. We don't want, let us say I am someone in authority, and I can say, Mr. Company, you give my son a scholarship, and I'll ensure you get in your 6 million. There's where a potential for abuse can occur. And this, all I'm saying is, yes, 6 million is a lot of money, but we should ensure that whatever companies are given these scholarships, getting these artistic, grants or tax benefits, they be above board, because it's really taxpayers' money, and sometimes the ministry involved in also saying what is allowed or not. So I'm saying put some things in place where it can be transparent. And I'm thinking if this runs the transparent way, it can benefit a lot of persons. It can benefit a lot. There's a young chap in Tobago I know who is an excellent cricketer, but he cannot afford to go in any sports academy. A company could sponsor him. He can go and he can be one of the best leading cricketers. But if it's misused, we can have allegations of corruption being pointed at that, years, down the line that, government may have borrowed money and they're using this money to fund certain things, to use their influence. So just to prevent that old talk, I'm begging, let's put some things in place that no one can point fingers. That doesn't do the nation well. So, Mr. Vice President, I would like to move away from this now and look at the fact that the Customs Act, Chapter 78.02, actually, this piece of legislation here, where the second schedule to the Customs Act is amended in item 6AA5 by deleting the words 3,000 and substituted to the words 5,000. I commend that. A lot of persons may come in with their goods and services. They save up their money to buy things. They come in here. At least this will give some level of relief to persons coming into the country. When I looked at the Cooperative Societies Act, which was amended by, in section 41.3 by deleting the words $5,000 and substituting the words $50,000. This again is something that we have to commend. Member Jennifer Batiste actually shocked me when she mentioned the price of a funeral could range from $8,000 to $50,000. So that range, it's expensive. It's probably, and then, most of, I think this legislation was in 1971. Yeah? So definitely, in Trinidad, it's expensive to die, Yes. Yeah, you can't afford it. It's expensive to die. So, yeah, good. So what I'm saying, this piece of legislation, I support it fully. And I know we have a grant that we also get from social welfare. I think it's around 7, and there's an NIS grant, and probably, the NIS grant may have to pay a little catch-up to this figure. Not to 50, but the minimum I think is 8,000, but we may have to play catching up in other pieces of legislation. I would like to just mention the fact that when I looked at the Petroleum Taxes Act, the honourable member mentioned that we're looking at raising this tax credit from 20 to 25% in the petroleum tax. And as a result of trying to encourage these plants, who are old plants, to see if they could regenerate, if they can continue, a beautiful piece of legislation, I think, to support and to help. So all in all, Mr. Vice President, I would like to say that these measures, I think it's needed. These measures, I hope we could stimulate the economy. I hope we can get some foreign exchange to come in. And I see some measures there will, in fact, help some of our members, coming into the airport, persons who have this funeral grant. And I say I would support it, and I thank you, government, for bringing such a legislation. Thank you.
Senator Dylan Remy.
Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to have this brief presentation on the Finance Bill 2019. My comments are going to be confined to Clause 2, Section C of the bill, which seeks to amend the Income Tax Act, Section 48.7, Section 48M, by deleting the words 25% and substituting the words 100%. I applaud the decision by the government in their provision to increase the tax incentive for solar water heaters. And Honorable Minister, my question was, and since I've just been enlightened by the Honorable Minister LaHunt about this policy, I will still state it. I wanted to know what was the overall policy on renewable forms of energy. And I ask that still because I know how many times we do things in the heat of the moment and we do it and they remain on paper, just as Minister LaHunt was indicating that had happened with the previous government. I would hate to see a good thing go to waste. And I do think that this is a good initiative. I just want to make sure that it is really, it just does not stay on paper, or it's something that's just done now, and then next year or two we don't see it happen. We don't see any more initiatives to it. I had read a report from the Regulated Industries Corporation dated July 2019, entitled Towards Renewable Energy Deployment in the Electricity Sector of Trinidad and Tobago, and some of the recommendations of that article on the priorities of the government of Trinidad and Tobago on renewable energy agenda should be, and they indicated that they needed to establish a clear renewable energy policy with targets, strategy, and roadmap. Well, now that the policy is laid, my understanding is that it has to be made known so that people could get on board with it. They also indicated that they wanted to see established legislative, institutional, and regulatory structure for renewable energy. They wanted to see facilitation of institutional capacity building, and another one was creating markets for and the support of commercialization of renewable energy. And that was among more, these were the ones I took out, but there were more recommendations. An article from the National Energy Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago entitled Renewable Energy in Trinidad and Tobago, the then Honorable Nicole Olivieri, Minister of Energy at that time, I think it was in 2015, indicated that consideration was being given to the achievement of at least 10% of the total of local electricity generation from renewable energy by 2021. That was said then. Honorable Minister, you just indicated that the Trinidad and Tobago policy is that we are committing to increasing the production of electrical energy from renewable sources to 10% by 2031. I just want to know whether, what exactly, is it 2021, 2031? I'm asking for a clarification of this discrepancy. Mr. Vice President, the Honorable Minister, I would like her to clarify if the 12,000 persons that you had mentioned so far benefiting from the incentives that were introduced, is that 12,000 since October 3rd, when the budget was read, or was it since it was on the books in 2011 that there was supposed to be a tax incentive for solar energy, for purchasing of solar heaters? Because it wasn't the part that is being amended to the Income Tax Act was there since 2011. I'm just asking whether that number of 12,000 persons were persons who took the initiative since that time, 2011, or is it since October the 3rd? I am saying this because I just wanted to know whether the increase from 25% to 100% what are we expecting to happen from that? Are people going to run for it? If people didn't run for it before, are they going to run for it now? Are they going to take it up now because they think that the government is really serious about this, and they are getting on board to something that is going somewhere? I'm saying this, Honorable Minister, because it was mentioned by one of the presenters before about the initiative to use CNG and give the cars, compressed natural gas cars, they had no taxes on them. I am still waiting on the CNG station in Tobago, 2 years after purchasing a car. You know, it has been said, oh yes, it's coming, but it has not yet come. I hope that this kind of initiative will not be such, but we will see the effects of it soon. With those few comments, Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to make a short contribution on this bill, the Finance Bill 2019, which seeks to give effect to some of the measures announced in the budget 2019-2020. Mr. Vice President, as to use a word that I learned in secondary school, as she is wont to, I listened to Senator Haynes read a lot of headlines from the newspaper, including one on the Prime Minister's residence, and once again declare boldly that this government has done nothing in 4 years plus. Well, I want to exhibit one. I am proud to associate myself on your behalf in the Senate with one headline in the newspaper. It's from the Newsday yesterday. Newsday yesterday, Jada Lutu, and it reads, couple to explain their wealth under new law. That is a significant achievement in this country. It didn't just fall from the sky. You see, in September 2015, after several mutual evaluation rounds by CFATF and FATF, acronyms that we've grown familiar with because this government has brought several pieces of legislation to deal with international financial obligations. This Explain Your Wealth legislation was part of a suite of legislation brought not just like that, consequent upon the laying for the first time in this country's history of a legislative agenda to cover the period 2015 to 2020. So this government laid a legislative agenda covering several areas of law, including financial and including crime fighting, and becoming compliant with our obligations in relation to anti-money laundering. Alongside that, anti-terrorism legislation and other things relating to dealing with crime in this country, including anti-gang legislation, legislation depriving certain persons of bail, legislation dealing with firearms, including one which was surprisingly refused in this House, legislation dealing with automatic firearms. Refused by my friends, I should say, but thankfully supported by 7 of the 9 independent senators. So my first point is this. I'm not going to go into the infrastructure projects and the cutting out of corruption and wastage. My friends, my colleagues on this side have addressed this over a period of time. But I would say, if there is one thing we've done as a government for this country from 2015 to now, is to deal with the criminal law legislation that is required and to deal with our international commitments relating to anti-money laundering, much of which languish under, my friends. And when I see, as a citizen of this country, when I see a headline like this, couple to explain their wealth under new law, I feel that we're heading in the right direction. We would not complete it by 2020. But in the next 5 years, we will build on what we've built on, because we've demonstrated not only the willingness, but the capability to bring to this country the leadership and the work ethic, particularly in the Houses of Parliament, that this country requires. I listened to Senator Haynes. Our priorities are skewed. You're very correct about that. We've avoided the IMF, which is where you were taking us, because you obviously had no plan. With revenues where it was, the only contribution you managed to make to the Heritage and Stabilization Fund was money that you borrowed. And while our revenues were declining, you continued to spend. And what was your spending on? Election spending. The only place you didn't build box trains was on trees. And given another few months under the Constitution, maybe you might have done that. But your spending was out of control. I've said it to you before. In your haste, you contracted for the Point Fortin Hospital without putting the financing arrangements in place. I told you that. And it is not a question of the PNM in government repeating these stories. It is just to remind you of what we've spent our time doing. You gave a commitment to build a hospital in Arima. Again, no financing arrangements in place. You agreed to double-digit increases across the public sector. And my question to you is, has the productivity increased? You gave a significant and unprecedented increase to the public sector at a time when you were aware that the energy revenues were declining. Core revenue was declining. You did not make any arrangements to pay the back pay. You were fooling the public servants, so you granted the increase. You signed the agreement. In fact, you are right. You signed a record number of agreements deposited in the industrial court. But you also failed to pay a record sum of back pay that we inherited. And we came to work finding that in your deliberations and negotiations with the public sector unions, you made absolutely no change in the design of the public service. So what we have today remains what has been around all the time. There's been no increase in productivity and no greater efficiency in the public service. But there's been a $5 billion debt that we've had to settle. You said our priorities are skewed. You're right. Our priorities are skewed in the sense that while your school building program, for example, these schools that you say you built, well, they were mere conduits for corrupt tendering practices. And we've had, through EFCL and through other parts of the state, we've had audits, we've had investigations, and we've had matters which are before the courts. Because it's not a matter of just building. It's not a matter of just spending. It's in the manner in which you've done it. And everybody mentioned the Beetham wastewater that you rushed through at the end, awarded to a contractor whose bid was several hundred millions, a favored contractor, a few days before election. And you know, does it bother you? Does it bother you in any way when you make your boasts? Does it bother you in any way that the contractor who got the most contracts in terms of value under you has not been in Trinidad since the government has changed? Does it bother you that Mr. Lala has not been in Trinidad since September when the government changed? Why? Why would somebody who had such a lucrative contracting business with 60-something companies doing so well able to beat an international contractor out for that Beetham wastewater project, able to convince you that they should get a 40% upfront payment. Why has the principal of that company and those companies not resided in this country since you lost government? Why don't you tell the country that? Our priorities are skewed because we have put things in place not only for something like that not to happen, but for persons who are of interest to this country to one day be held accountable wherever they are. And this issue of the Prime Minister's residence. You know, last night I shared a photo. Last night the Parliament posted a photo of the almost ready Red House. The almost ready Red House. And I shared it on my Facebook page. Because you know what? I am proud that the Prime Minister of this country, took personal responsibility to oversee the completion of the Red House, President's House, Whitehall. He took personal leadership to ensure that if not in this 5-year term, because we've not been able to afford completing the Eric Williams Library, that we will do it. And at least one person said, but you could be feeding people with the money, you could be doing this, you could be doing that. But the PNM is held answerable for the sins of everybody else. You know, nobody is looking. You know, there were sacred bones buried on the Red House site. But nobody is thinking about the millions, if not billions, you buried when you were in government and you had responsibility for that site. Throughout your term, that Red House was covered with galvanized like a shantytongue, and millions upon millions were being spent. And we had no choice. What would we have done? You say that there are priorities. And that was one. In order to save what was spent and sunk and wasted there, we had to finish it. And it's not a place for Lyman and party, you know. It's the seat of government. It's the seat of the Parliament. And in doing that, we've also said that this space that money was spent to develop so that we could use as an alternative is not going to waste. We've said to relieve the burden on the Hall of Justice. The Hall of Justice is going to be used exclusively for the criminal courts. And more than 25, I think the number is 34, civil courts will operate from these floors once occupied by the Parliament. So this thing about you're not seeing anything. Obviously you're not seeing anything because you're not seeing your friends around you. You're not seeing your financiers around you. What you're seeing is a country sunk by you into the depths of debt. A box-trained country and culture created by you, slowly being reversed while we repair the society and repair the finances of this country. And you are in no position to cast any doubts on this government because you do not know how to run anything in government. I listened to my friend Senator Mark, the most experienced of my colleagues on the opposition bench. And he said we promised exporting oil for earning forex. We promised that. Well, let Senator Haynes read the headline for you. Heritage, for the first time in the country's history, Heritage sold crude oil on the spot market and earned foreign exchange for that. And it was the same, all of you became crude oil experts and say, it's sour oil. You know, it reminded me of when the opposition leader held up the 2 containers with something black in it. I don't know if it's molasses or what. and announced the largest find in my part of the country, southeast Trinidad, and nothing came out of it. Heritage has been able, that is how Heritage has been earning its foreign exchange, selling on the spot market before the crude was refined here. But it's now selling. And for somebody like Senator Mark, an economist, to make such a loose and flippant statement on something so significant, he did. Well, I wasn't listening to him as usual, but I like to listen to him. He's my friend. And talks about the government has not only crashed this economy, but the government is also bankrupt. Listen. Learn the maths. In my budget contribution, I said to you, in relation to Senator Obika's contribution, all you see is money to spend. Money to, like a little child in a parlor. Money to spend, but nowhere in your thinking or your communication or your logic do you talk about paying for it. I grew up in a culture where we had to think tight. You always had to be worried about how you're paying for it and trying not to embarrass your parents by showing an interest in anything. Because you know they couldn't afford it. They simply could not have afforded it. We didn't bankrupt this country or we didn't crash this economy. Our dependence on oil, we rode. When the ride was good, we rode as a country. And when the revenues declined as significantly as it was, we had to deal with it. And I said it before, I'm surprised. I sit in a cabinet, and I am surprised that between the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance and the Minister in the Ministry of Finance when she joined the cabinet, they have been able, together with the public servants, to hold it together, to hold this country together, that we could still go on the international market and borrow, that we could still raise funds, that the downgrades we experienced, partly on account of our state sector, partly on account of Petrotrin and its indebtedness, we were still able to borrow, that we could have launched NIF and floated NIF locally and still raise more than we set out to raise. And other companies in this country have been able to enjoy success, even though sometimes they complain because we can't seem to please the business sector in the way in which they want to be pleased. But everybody has to make a contribution towards the survival of this country in the circumstances. And then I listened to this thing about treasury bills. Well, listen, the legislation is there. I remember a similar, in the NIF, I remember a similar thing being said about government bonds and about bonds and so on, and we do it in this. Even Saturday I had to hear that maybe we're printing more money than we need to replace the $100 bill and all this nonsense that we hear sometimes. The point is that, and my friend Senator Deonarayan distinguished between treasury bills for debt management and treasury bills for mopping up operations. Well, the fact is that even when my friends were in government, even when you were in government, with all the liquidity in the country, with all the money flowing and box drain money all over the place, you were using treasury T-bills consistently. And maybe not even you, because that is how the public servants and that is how the system operates. You were routinely issuing $625 million in T-bills and repurchasing and issuing and so on consistently. And since September 2015 to now, for a few months difficult period, this government has never gone past the $1 billion level on T-bills for debt management purposes, except on 4 occasions. That's the only time. And on those 4 occasions, we've just gone over $1 billion, $1.2 billion, I believe, being the highest. So to ask for room to move from $5 billion to $7 billion is not consistent with what we've been doing in relation to T-bill for debt management purposes. But we do not want to have to come back here, and we do not want to have to be in a position, because we've not lied to the country. We've said consistently that we've had problems meeting the wage bill. We've said that consistently. The biggest claim on the revenues in this country is the public sector wage bill. We've said that. I have said in the budget allocations, when you look at recurrent expenditure, I've said across ministries, 65% is the average in recurrent expenditure for which the wages and salaries have to be paid. And we've said to you consistently that there are times when we cannot pay wages. I, for example, in the Standing Committee of Finance, I talked about cable, a simple thing as cable and internet. I came in as a minister and I inherited $11 million for forestry division alone. Mr. Vice President, in accordance with Standing Order 14.5, I beg to move that the Senate continues to sit until the completion of the business at hand, inclusive of the matters on the motion for adjournment.
Honorable Senators, the question is that the Senate continue to sit until the completion of the business at hand, inclusive of the matters on the motion for the adjournment. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The business of the Senate continues until completion of the business at hand. Acting Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, in closing off on Senator Mark's contribution, I want to refer to two more things. One is what Senator Mark calls the government's cardinal sin, closing down Petrotrin. And I say once again in this House, I say it again, I have heard since September 2015 when I was sworn in, and in the many discussions in this House, including a motion on the government's decision on Petrotrin, I have not heard from the opposition's bench for anywhere in the opposition a proposal for dealing with Petrotrin. I have not heard that. In fact, post-Petrotrin, because Petrotrin, the core of Petrotrin is still there. The core business of Petrotrin is still there. I have not even heard a plan for heritage. We'll have to wait because, you know, sugarcane in this country was shut down in 2003. And it took 16 years for our friends in the opposition to come up with a plan to bring back Caroni 1975 Limited and sugarcane. So 19 plus 16 is 35. By 2035, we may hear this plan for Petrotrin. And the bullet payments would have become due this year and next year. And our friends on the other side would still, as they say, they would have still been standing in their shoes and wondering. But this was not a simple decision. This was not an easy decision. But when I stood there and spoke on the motion, I said to the country, if you say there are 9,000 jobs involved in Petrotrin, you are concerned about the 9,000. I am concerned about the 1.2 million people in this country, including that 9,000. And if we could not find a way to fund, those two bullet payments, we would have been in an even bigger predicament. You see, I will tell you, I will refresh your memory just now, young man. You see, when you had to fund the highway to Point 14 and the $7 billion cost, you did not see a problem in not borrowing because you had a problem. You see, a project of that nature, just remember international lending rates. When you went out under then Minister Dukaran, when you went out to get an idea of the rates at which the lending will be made for that Point 14 project, the rates were extremely low because rates were low in the international market. And you spoke to the Dutch. But the thing about it is the conditions, because with an international lender, you would not have been able to handpick the contractors and the subcontractors and so on. You would not have been able to manipulate designs and all of that. You would not have been able to engage in the corruption that you have engaged in relation to the land acquisition. You would not have been able. Because I said to the country, in my newspaper column that the problem in that Point 14 project is not the fact that you funded it out of recurrent because you did not want to be under the scrutiny of an international lender. The problem is the land acquisition, and a commission of inquiry will tell us what went on there. We could not do that with Petrotrin. We could not fund the 2 bullet payments out of revenues. We could not engage in simi-dimi. We had to go, and I congratulate once again the leadership of Heritage, the Minister of Finance, the Ministry of Finance, and above all the Prime Minister, for being able in those difficult circumstances and in a challenging lending market to be able to refinance the 2 bullet payments in that Petrotrin debt. You would never have been able to do that. You would never, because your idea of crude oil in this country is the opposition leader holding 2 glasses with some dark substance in it and calling it an oil bonanza. And where did you miss the many statements the Prime Minister has made? Where did you miss it? He stood in the House. He stood in the House in the debate on this bill, and he engaged the country on this issue of BP and Shell. And when you said, and your surrogates out there, when you and your surrogates, just as you are trying on ministerial titles, you have people out there trying on ministerial titles too. But your surrogates out there were saying, you should not stand up to BP. BP will pack up and run, is the Prime Minister who said on Friday night in this place. He said, why would BP even contemplate that when their shareholders know that 25% of their revenue come from this little rock here and the waters around it? You must be foolish. You must be foolish to even believe that somebody with the experience of Keith Rowley as Prime Minister would not fight for more than a fair deal for this country and win. And that money is not petty cash. It is $2 billion payments, one from Shell and one from BP, that found its way into the country's coffers. I may have paid for medicine and may have paid to just keep us afloat, and we did nothing. I am happy that our priorities are skewed, Senator Haynes. I am happy that it is skewed to always trying to keep this country afloat, trying to do right by our people, to set this country back onto the right path, and to run the financial and moral affairs of this country in the manner that they should. And we will not always get it right. We will not always get it right. We will not always get it right. But on those days when we deal with matters of significant importance in this country, this PNM government from 1956 to now has shown that we could get it right. And I want to close off by telling you, see, I understand the local government elections and elections well. I understand it. I take my wins and my losses with the same smile. But I want to tell you something. When you're analyzing local government election results, let me just remind you of something. You won in 2010. You won in May 24, 2010. And you contested a local government. Well, it wasn't wrong yet. Well, it just come. Contested a local government in 2010. 26th of July 2010, you contested an election. And you won 74 seats. And you know, you won in areas, but you see, we never know who we dealing with, you know. Because when it's convenient to you, you fly your yellow and your UNC. And when it's convenient for you to be something else, you call yourself COP. And then you hook up with Njak. And then you hook up with Abdullah. Right? But
45-1, Mr. Vice President.
We know
Let him allow the.
We know when we peel.
They're interrupting him. Let them be quiet. I'm serious.
I understand. Still, Minister, continue, and members obviously just monitor the noise in the chamber as the Minister is making his presentation. Continue, Minister.
No, we know, because I know about mammals, you know. I know mammals who change their skin. But I don't know many creatures who borrow somebody's skin. I know about people who borrow clothes. But I don't know about political party who is borrow a COP jacket, a MSJ pants, a NJAC hat.
Nah, shoes.
You are in the business of this, guys. When you see the Balize coming, is we. The whole country know that. So with some help from some friends, with some help from some friends in 2010, you took San Fernando, right? You took Diego Martin, right? You got one in Port of Spain with some help from some friends. But keep smiling and learn your history. On the 21st of October 2013, energy revenues, the 2014 is when the trouble started. Energy revenues are the highest during your administration. Money flowing, liquidity in the economy, all kind of things happening. You say you create 80,000 jobs, yeah, 80,000 jobs created. Monday, 21st October 2013, you move from 74 local government seats to 46. 46. You in government. You in government. You in control. Money flowing. Right. Learn your history, because let me tell you something. I'll close. I will close by saying this. I will close by saying this. The harsh decisions this government took, particularly in the one thing you do not wish to interfere with, was Petrotrin. You're so afraid of Petrotrin that up to now, you cannot articulate a plan for post-PNM dealing with Petrotrin. You're afraid Petrotrin. You're afraid the TTRA because you don't want to interfere with customs. You do not want to interfere with the PSA. You're afraid. I am proud to know that having made the harsh decisions, having had to do the things that we've had to do as a government, that we could still face an electorate as we did in 16, as we did in 19, and drop 3 or 4 local government seats. Because you are afraid. You are afraid. And while all of you and your friends are trying on ministerial title, and you are shopping for ministerial vehicles, I will tell you this. If you get into government, you will have the same numbers to face that we face. You will have the same problems with the energy sector that we face. The difference between you and this government is that we face it, we confront our problems and this country's problems with a brave face and with a plan. And with a plan not to only win an election and get into government, but to lift this country and change this country in the manner we believe we are capable of changing it. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Honorable Senators, at this point in time, just permit me to suspend for 7 minutes. This also now stands suspended until 8 p.m.